Hi, my name is Robert Zayas. I'm the Executive Director of the New York State Public High School Athletic Association. Welcome to the 2020 Athletic Director Eligibility Workshop. Obviously, because of the COVID crisis, we're not all able to be in the same location as we typically are, so we are going to host this year's workshop via webinar. We'll still cover a tremendous amount of information, but in a little bit more of a condensed fashion, considering the amount of time that is going to be taken to go ahead and review all of the rules and regulations of the New York State Public High School Athletic Association and also the New York State Education Department. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for the work that you've done over the course of the last 7 months to prepare for the beginning of the school year. I'd also like to recognize the dedicated efforts of all 11 section executive directors as they have worked literally around the clock to prepare for this school year and to address the many questions and concerns that many of you have had. With that being said, we'll go ahead and begin the 2020 Athletic Director Eligibility Workshop at this time. So at the end of the workshop, you will be asked to go ahead and verify your attendance and to complete the code of conduct. We've done this the last few years. So for you veteran athletic directors, you have grown accustomed to doing this. We ask that you complete this webinar and this AD workshop no later than November 27th. It is important that you fill out not only the attendance for verification, but also the code of conduct, recognizing that you understand that students and coaches have a certain level of conduct that they must display while participating in regional and state championship events. Here's just a quick snapshot of some of the information that you will find on the code of conduct, and we'll give you instructions at the end of this webinar as to how to verify your attendance and where to complete your code of conduct. So the workshop format is similar to what we've done in the past. We will cover very briefly a few COVID-related items and then get into a discussion about rules and regulations with a major emphasis on the transfer rule, because that is one of the more widely asked questions, I should say, that we at the state office receive. We'll also cover some informational topics and then get into a verification of your attendance. So COVID response. Our High School Athletic Association has been doing a tremendous amount of work over the course of the last 7 months to get our schools information and resources to prepare for the 2021 school year. We have done a tremendous amount of advocacy, not just with local leaders, but also with state officials. We did create a COVID task force that has met 5 times. And I really want to encourage everybody that we have to remain flexible. Things are going to change throughout the course of this school year, and we have to be willing to revise, amend, and pivot as often as we can, and really base our decisions on readily available information rather than what we think or what we speculate could occur as the school year progresses. I also want to bring attention to the fact that the New York State Department of Health has released guidance specifically on face coverings, spectators, and they have also done a risk assessment for sports. The New York State Department of Health is the entity and the organization that is responsible for the guidance that we as the High School Athletic Association are disseminating to all of our member schools. When you go onto our website, if you look at the upper right-hand corner, you will see a COVID-19 information tab. If you click on that tab, you can go ahead and find all of the information that we as the State High School Athletic Association have related to COVID. For the NYSPHSAA and SED rules and regulations, I want to bring your attention to the NYSPHSAA handbook, and this is a slide that we've used in the past at athletic director workshops. Be reminded that you can access our handbook, and it's always up to date with the latest information as a result of the executive committee and central committee's approval of recent action items. When you click on the handbook, you'll see a table of contents. This is an interactive table of contents that will provide you with the ability to go through and find information quickly about any rules and regulations related to the New York State Public High School Athletic Association and also the State Education Department. There is a difference, however, between SED Commissioner's Regulations and NYSPHSAA Rules and Regulations. I want to bring your attention to that because there is a clear difference. The New York State Education Department's Commissioner's Regulations can be found within our handbook. We, as a high school athletic association, do not have the ability to revise or amend any SED regulations. Here's another page within the handbook that we link to that'll give you the latest information related to SED rules and regulations. And this information, again, can be found within our handbook. One of the SED regulations that we'd like to bring your attention to is the athletic placement process. This is an SED regulation. We, as the State High School Athletic Association, do not have the ability to revise this. However, if you look at the APP, as it's referred to, be reminded that students must only pass 4 out of 5 test components. This was a change a few years ago, and there still continues to be questions about this. Also looking at the athletic placement process, when you have the Tanner score, be reminded that this is only a recommended Tanner score, and that comes from the State Education Department. If your school medical director wants to require the Tanner score, that is at their discretion, but within the SED rules and regulations, Tanner scores are only recommended. Also, as a part of SED rules and regulations, all NYSPHSAA member schools must abide by SED regulations for coaching certifications. Keep in mind that this includes non-public schools, volunteer, and assistant coaches. Everyone must have coaching certification if they're working with student athletes. Within our handbook, we do have a definitions section, and this can be very valuable to you as an athletic administrator to go through. It gives you some quick information about some key topics within the association's handbook. Looking at bylaws and eligibility. Again, this is one of the sections of the handbook that is oftentimes widely used, and there's usually an awful lot of questions about this throughout any school year. But our handbook, we try to make it as clear and concise as possible. We've done a lot of work on our handbook over the last few years to provide everyone with the most up-to-date information so that way it can be easily and quickly referenced. When you're looking at age and grade, here's an example of what you will see in the handbook. When anything is highlighted in yellow, that means with the SED logo, that means that is a commissioner's regulation. And at any time, the State High School Athletic Association does not have the ability to change a commissioner's regulation. We could certainly advocate to the State Education Department, but we are not able to change anything. Age and grade is one of them. You have to realize that students who turn 19 prior to July 1st of any school year are ineligible for that year. This is oftentimes a widely asked question, but this is, again, an SED regulation. Also, the amateur rule. This is a NYSPHSAA rule, but be reminded that students cannot accept money or other compensation, and this does include gift cards, gift certificates. That is not permissible. However, entry fees, travel, meals, and lodging expenses are permitted. So we've highlighted this. The other aspect to be aware of when it comes to the amateur rule is that capitalizing on a student's athletic fame is against the amateur rule. Those students cannot receive money or gifts of any monetary value as a result of the amateur rule. So a good example of this is if your golf team is given a complimentary membership to a local country club. If the entire golf team is given the membership, that is not a violation of the amateur rule. However, if your number one golfer is the only individual given a free membership to the local country club, that student athlete would be considered to be capitalizing on their athletic fame, and that would be in violation of the NYSPHSAA amateur rule. The appeal procedure. This is something that we try to bring your attention to. At any point in time as a member school, you have the ability to appeal the decision of your section's athletic council. But be aware that you have to go through, or you should go through, your own section's appeal process prior to bringing an appeal to the state. And here are the 3 reasons that the state level appeal panel can go ahead and overturn your section's athletic council's decision. It is important to bring attention to the fact, however, that the state level appeal panel cannot overturn a section athletic council's decision just simply because they feel bad for the student or they may disagree with the athletic council's decision. It has to fit in one of these three criteria that you see there on your screen. Also, the appeal filing fee was increased in July of 2019, and that appeal filing fee is now $500. Bona fide student regulation. This is an SED regulation as well. It states that a student must, in order to represent their school, must be taking at least 4 subjects, including physical education. There's been a lot of discussion about the bona fide student regulation as it pertains to COVID. And SED has declared that a student taking all classes remote is still considered to be a bona fide student as long as they're taking their 3 courses plus physical education. Combining of teams and graduated scale is something that has been worked on an awful lot. Beginning with the 2019-2020 school year, the combining of teams percentages were modified and revised. So you have to be aware when you're combining with another school or merging with another school, it is now sports specific. So be aware of that as you're identifying what your numbers will be if you're going to combine or merge with another sports or another team's program. The college rule is something that is also a question that we get asked an awful lot throughout the school year. During at any point in time, a student is no longer eligible to represent their school in that sport in that season if the student participates in a practice or competition with or against any individual or team representing their college in that season. A good example that we typically use is if a softball athlete is going on a college recruiting trip in the fall, and that student is going and touring the campus, and then at any point in time, somebody says to the student, why don't you come out to practice this afternoon? It's in the month of October. We know you're not actually involved in your high school season, and go through batting practice, hit some in the cage. That is not a violation of the college rule because those student athletes would not be participating in that sport in that season. The same example, softball player goes on a college recruiting trip in the spring during the softball season, that student would find themselves in violation of the college rule. At the bottom of this screen, you also see that there's a video interpretation. A few years ago, we taped some video interpretations for about 6 or 7 different NYSPHSAA rules and SED regulations. If you see that icon at the bottom of the screen, you can click on that and again, get a video explanation about the rule or the regulation as it pertains to student athletes within the High School Athletic Association. Duration of competition is another SED regulation that gets an awful lot of attention throughout the year. You need to be reminded that regardless of participation, students are utilizing their eligibility. So when you talk about consecutive semesters, so a student that starts participating at the high school level as a 7th grader has 6 consecutive years to participate in that sport. 8th graders have 5 consecutive years, and students that start participating at the high school level as a 9th grader have 4 consecutive years to participate in high school athletics. Now, when you talk about an extension of eligibility, this is a 5th year of eligibility. It is not, however, an additional year of eligibility. A student that misses a semester of eligibility as a result of an illness or accident or a social emotional condition which has led to needing additional semesters to graduate would be a candidate for an extension of eligibility. So the question that you need to ask if a student has an illness, accident, or a social emotional condition beyond their control is, what semester of eligibility did the student miss? Also, what was the student's illness, accident, or social emotional condition, which is requiring additional semesters to graduate? And then also, as we referenced a little while ago, the age of 19 rule and regulation must be abided by. Foreign exchange and international students. Please recognize the fact that we have 3 different types of foreign exchange students that could be arriving at your school. Foreign exchange students in a CSIET program, foreign exchange students not in a CSIET program, and international students. On the right side of your screen, you can see that on the CSIET website, they do have all of the bona fide foreign exchange programs that are CSIET certified listed on their website. So that would fall under category number 1. When you talk about foreign exchange students, the first one, those foreign exchange students in a CSIET program, everybody's subject to the transfer rule, but they're given a 1-year waiver of the transfer rule because of the fact that they're involved in the CSIET program. Under the second category, those students not involved in a CSIET program, also subject to the transfer rule, and they're ineligible in any sports they participated in the prior year, prior to arriving in the United States, that they have participated at a higher or an equal level. And the same thing goes for an international student. But realize, right now, because of the COVID crisis, we're seeing a drastic reduction in the number of students that are coming to the United States through foreign exchange and international exchange programs. Health examination is something to be aware of during any time period, but especially during the pandemic that we're addressing right now. The health examination basically states that a student must engage in interscholastic competition and they must have a health examination and health history update when required. They cannot practice or participate without the approval of their school medical officer. So please keep that in mind. All students must have a physical. Right now, during this fall semester, the State Education Department has waived all physicals for student athletes participating in fall sports. We have been told by the State Education Department that there is no discussion at this point in time to waive any physical exam requirement for winter or spring sport athletes. Another SED regulation is mixed competition. Please make sure that when student athletes are interested in participating in a sport that does not coincide with their gender, that they can still participate if they abide by the mixed competition rules and regulations. Again, this is an SED regulation. If you use this chart that is contained within the regulations of the State Education Department, it provides you exactly what needs to be done for a student that is a male and wants to participate on a female team, or a female that wants to participate on a male team. So please make sure you're referencing this chart for any mixed competition questions. Outside agencies, if your school is hosting an event and it's co-sponsored by another organization, a college or a university, you need to make sure that you're submitting an application form to your section athletic council prior to the planning of that contest, and you receive approval from your section to go ahead and host an event with an outside agency involvement. Penalties. This is something that's changed a little bit in the course of the last few months, especially with our central committee meeting. But the Rule 19 for penalties, if a school uses an ineligible player, they are forced to go ahead and forfeit that contest as a result of using an ineligible player. Now, when you talk about the maximum number of games penalty, this has been revised. The rule has always read that a team that exceeds the maximum number of games is ineligible from that point forward, and that is still the case. However, the Central Committee in late July approved the bottom portion of this rule that now gives a school the option, if they have exceeded the maximum number of games, gives them the option to go ahead and suspend their head coach from all team-related functions and activities, including but not limited to practices, scrimmages, conditioning, film sessions, and games, from the date of the violation for the remainder of the season. The use of this option, as the regulation now reads, must be submitted to the section executive director and the state executive director in writing from the school superintendent or headmaster, basically self-reporting the violation and identifying the use of this addition to the maximum number of games penalty. Practice sessions. This is also a question that we're getting an awful lot right now because of the COVID crisis. There's a few items to point out within the practice session. Right now, 7 consecutive days cannot be utilized for practice. Starting on October the 12th, schools will be able to practice on 7 consecutive days, and that was approved by the officers of the association. So during the fall season, starting October 12th, you can practice on 7 consecutive days. There has been no changes to the 7 consecutive day practice rule for the winter sports or the spring sports season. However, the 7 consecutive day rule has been waived for the fall sports season 2 season that'll begin on March 1st. Also, keep in mind that only 1 practice session per day can count. A practice session conducted on the same day as a game cannot be counted to the required number of practices. All practice sessions must include vigorous activity, and warm-ups prior to a game cannot count towards the considered number of practices. Also, we have made the interpretation at the state office that practices done in a remote fashion via Zoom or via video conference do not count towards the required number of practices. The reason why that is all practices must be overseen and supervised by a school board approved coach. And that's for 2 reasons. One, the school board approved coach is there for skill development, obviously, but also to render first aid or emergency services if needed. So to conduct a practice via Zoom with 15 or 20 players would not give that coach the ability to render first aid if needed. Any off-season conditioning workouts must abide by the fact that the State High School Athletic Association has said that all off-season conditioning workouts, they cannot be mandated, and then all off-season conditioning practices must also be available to the entire student body in the school. Standard practice requirement, all practice requirements have been standardized now for varsity all the way through the modified program. So there is no longer a differentiation between what high school athletics need to do and what modified athletes need to do when it comes to getting ready for your first game. So there are 6 practices to represent your school, 10 in the sport of football, gymnastics, wrestling, and baseball. Now, because of the COVID crisis, the State High School Athletic Association has increased this practice requirement only for the fall sports taking place right now to 10 total practices. Starting with the winter sports season, we will revert back to this rule that you see in the middle of your screen, 6 practices to represent your school, 10 in those other 4 sports. The representation rule is also something to be aware of when we have postseason events. For team sports, all students must be an eligible participant in at least 6 scheduled contests in order to be able to participate and represent their school in the postseason. For the sport of football, you only need to be an eligible participant for 3 contests. In competitive cheerleading, it's 2. But notice I'm only referring to being an eligible participant, because in team sports, that's the requirement, is being an eligible participant. You do not need to actually participate in any games in team sports in order to be an eligible participant or be able to represent your school in the postseason. It's a little different at the bottom of the screen for those team individual and individual sports such as archery, badminton, bowling, cross country, golf, gymnastics, swimming and diving, and outdoor track and field. In those team individual and individual sports, you must actually represent your school in 6 different meets or competitions in order to be eligible to represent your school in the postseason. Now, over the course of the last few years, we've really lessened the restrictive nature of these rules. And now within the representation rule, we do allow for girls, for example, to play on a boys team during the regular season and then play in a girls sectional tournament in the postseason. So we've really tried to find ways to make it more beneficial for students who might be participating in a mixed competition fashion to be able to participate during the regular season with their boys team, for example, or the opposite gender, and then also participate in the postseason. Same thing, this allows for those girls to play on a boys golf team during the regular season and then play in a girls only regular season tournament or matches. Again, lessening the restrictive nature of the representation rule to afford for more participation opportunities. Sportsmanship rule has stayed intact for coaches. If you are disqualified from a contest, you must sit out the next regularly scheduled contest. That has not changed. We do reference, though, that you need to sit out the next regularly scheduled contest in that sport in that season, and you cannot coach until you have sat out that next regularly scheduled contest. So you cannot be disqualified from a contest and then attempt to coach another level, whether it be junior varsity, or insert a lesser opponent at the varsity level, and to be able to then count that as your penalty. Coaches who are disqualified must sit out the next regularly scheduled contest. Now, for players, we have revised this rule over the course of the last few months, in that if a player is disqualified from a contest, they must sit out the next regularly scheduled contest. But we did also insert into the rule under number 3 is that a student, or number 1, 2, and 3, is that student cannot participate until they have set out the next regularly scheduled contest in that sport at that level. So at that level is really important, that student must sit out that sport at that level until they're able to participate again. The transfer rule is probably the most widely asked question that we receive as a high school athletic association during the school year. And your section executive directors, I am in constant communication with them. They also receive a lot of questions about the transfer rule. Sometimes we try to make the transfer rule more complicated. Transfers begin with a change in registration. So no change in registration equates to no transfer. So if a student has been attending your school for the 9th grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade, and then their parents are transferred for work, and their parents allow their son or daughter to remain back in your school district and live with another family to finish out their senior year, they have not changed registrations. Their parents are no longer living in the district, but if the district is okay with it, they haven't changed registration, there's no implications of the transfer rule. So really, when you look at the transfer rule, you have 2 different types of transfers. You have a corresponding change of address and a non-corresponding change of address, or without a corresponding change of address. So looking at the corresponding change of address, this is when a student changes registration and they also change their address. This is the easier of the 2 because the student is actually moving with their family. All of their belongings are moving from one location to another, and they're also changing school registration at the same time. Those students are considered to be eligible within a corresponding change of address situation. It is always important, however, to discuss any transfer rule issues with your section, because each section handles the submission of documentation related to the transfer rule in a little bit of a different manner. So make sure you're fully aware of what documentation needs to be submitted by your section, whether it be for a corresponding or a non-corresponding change of address. Now, also important to point out that a student's eligibility is determined by the situations and facts that exist at the time of registration. Be aware of this. We inserted this into the transfer rule a few years ago because we had students that were transferring and then attempting to change the situation while they were already at their new school. That is not the way that it works. A student's eligibility is determined by the situation and facts that exist at the time of registration. Now, the non-corresponding change of address, this was a major emphasis last year in the athletic director workshop. We have basically really lessened the restrictive nature of the transfer rule. Now we say that if a student transfers and they have a non-corresponding change of address, they're only ineligible at the varsity level in any sports they played at the prior year. Now, it's also important to note that students in grades 7 through 10 will be eligible to participate at the sub-varsity level, while students in grades 11 through 12 would just be limited to practice. Now, they can practice at any level. So, but at no point in time during the 1-year period of ineligibility at the varsity level should a student participate in a scrimmage or any type of exhibition at the varsity level. This was a widely asked question last year, is what if a student accidentally was inserted into a varsity game during their period of ineligibility? For all intents and purposes, that school would then have to forfeit that game because they've essentially used an ineligible player. Now, changing registration without a change of address is the easiest way to characterize a non-corresponding change of address. Again, What I just reviewed on the previous slide is they're ineligible at the varsity level for 1 year from the date of registration. 7th through 12th graders would be eligible to participate at the sub-varsity level and practice, while non-corresponding change of address athletes in grades 11 and 12 would be limited to practice only. Now, there are waivers and exemptions of the transfer rule that can be utilized to request eligibility. Here's a good question. A student turned 19 in late June. The athletic director asked, I know he's not eligible as per the SED age regulation, but can he practice with the varsity team? And the answer is no. The ability to practice is only granted for students who transfer without a corresponding change of address. It is not available for students that exceed the age rule or any other eligibility rules and regulations. Here's another question. An 11th grade student moved in with her older sister into our school district. Her parents remained in the previous school district. She was the leading scorer on her basketball team last year that won state. Is she eligible to play basketball? The answer is no. She is only able to practice. And the reason why is because she's in the 11th grade. Students that are in 7th through 12th grade would be able to play at the sub-varsity level. But in this example, because she's in the 11th grade and she transferred without a corresponding change of address, she would not be able to participate at the sub-varsity level. Take this same exact example, and instead of her being an 11th grader, make her a 10th grader. Then at that point in time, it really changes the dynamics of the response, and she would be then eligible to participate at the sub-varsity level. Another question that we have. We had a student who transferred without a corresponding change of address at the start of the school year. Unfortunately, my varsity baseball coach did not know that he was not eligible at the varsity level, and because of a shortage of players, the student played in 15 varsity baseball games. The athletic director asked, is there a penalty? There is certainly a penalty. This student is considered to be ineligible an athlete, and all games that that student athlete played in at the varsity level would have to be forfeited. Now, when you're talking about transfer waivers, any type of hardship, including but not limited to health and safety and financial, could be considered to be a valid request for a waiver. Again, you really need to work with your section as to how those requests for waivers need to be submitted, because there's not one standard way of submitting requests for waivers throughout the state. The most widely used transfer waiver, however, is the District of Residency waiver. And the District of Residency waiver allows a student to return back to their district of residency at any point in time during their athletic career at the high school level, return back to the district of residency that his or her parents currently reside. The important part of this rule is schools must submit the required transfer form to the section office. Athletes are not permitted to practice before the form has been submitted, and athletes are not permitted to compete without approval. I'm going to back up one slide here and talk about this aspect of the transfer rule, because it's important that superintendents approve students to attend school, but superintendents do not declare athletic eligibility. So an example is a student moves with mom who rents an apartment in the school district. Mom is renting a legitimate apartment in the school district. She's paying taxes in that school district. She's a legitimate resident of that school district. Dad and sister remain at a previous home and school district. That student can go to school there as given permission by the school superintendent. But as you can see at the bottom of the screen, the student's ineligible without a waiver or an exemption. So this is a clear example that just because the student can be given approval to attend school and actually take classes in that school district does not automatically equate to athletic eligibility. So transfer exemptions, we have 6 of them. Be familiar with these because these are often asked. So there's a difference between transfer waivers and transfer exemptions. And again, I'll emphasize that each section has a little bit of a different way of handling both waiver submission and exemption submission. Transgender guidelines. The easiest way to put this is that we as a high school athletic association essentially have produced within Rule 32 of the NYSPHSAA handbook transgender guidelines. The procedures are not mandates, nor are they requirements. These are simply guidelines that schools can follow to allow a school to determine the best team for placement of the student. So it's very much up to the school as to what team best suits the student's needs if they're considered to be a transgender student athlete. Now, high school sports standards. We do, unlike MLB or other professional leagues, we do have a jewelry rule. So the State High School Athletic Association has a jewelry rule. Students are not permitted to wear jewelry during practice or contest. We also have a drone policy. We approved this in May of 2017. So far, it's been very successful in limiting any dangers related to a drone flying over an athletic contest or a game. I do, as the executive director, have the authority to grant an exception to the drone policy, but that is done on a case-by-case basis. We do on our website have a drone exemption request form that can be filled out and submitted to us for the use of a drone. Oftentimes, we do grant permission if a school district is just installed new turf and they want to take a picture of the new turf over a game or a contest, but very seldom do we grant permission because of the safety risk, not only to the student athletes and officials, but also any fans in attendance. Also want to bring your attention to the fact that the thunder and lightning policy is still included in the NYSPHSAA handbook. And at this point in time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Todd Nelson, who's going to further discuss the thunder and lightning policy. Todd?
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it. Hello to all the athletic directors out there. I hope your fall season and preparation for the winter and spring season, I know is very difficult, but I hope we can help in that. To reiterate what Robert said, we do have a thunder and lightning policy. The current policy states that if you hear thunder or see lightning, that you must postpone or suspend any contest or practice. And then you must wait 30 minutes from the last time you hear thunder or see lightning before resuming the practice or the contest. Also, that if it is a game situation, that all participants and spectators should seek shelter. I will let you know that the safety committee has discussed this. It was brought up at our spring meeting last spring. There was a recommendation made to our executive committee to consider using technology, using WeatherBug and their Spark technology to determine a safe distance away for the lightning. We did some further research on that. We did contact WeatherBug. They put us in contact with their parent company, Earth Networks. There was some concern from our membership regarding the reliability of the Spark technology. This concern was verified by Earth Networks. So we did postpone the vote that was going to happen in July to use that technology. The safety committee did meet last week to discuss and heard from Earth Networks regarding their concerns. They are currently exploring with Earth Networks a new system that is much more reliable. It is called Spheric Maps, and they will possibly be making a recommendation in the spring to use the Spheric Map technology. There will be a cost to either the association and or the schools, so that will be taken into account as well. The next risk minimization policy that we want to talk about is the heat index and wind chill policy. We do use WeatherBug as a baseline policy for both heat index and wind chill. We did add to this policy for schools that wanted to use a wet bulb indicator, which can be determine what the heat index or wind chill is at that specific location. Schools can use that as well. Obviously, that is the gold standard in the weather arena. in terms of determining what the heat index and wind chill procedure is. So schools can use a wet bulb indicator on the site that is actually going to hold that contest. Next, I'd like to talk about the sports rules. I'd like to commend Robert Zayas for taking this on a few years ago and going through our handbook and really standardizing what our handbook looked like. So every sport landing page that we have in our handbook, in this case boys basketball, you can see that it is formatted. It has the rules that we follow, the maximum number of games, the practice requirements, the night's rest between contests, individual contest limitations, scrimmage limitations, waivers of the NFHS or whatever the governing body rules may be, are any NYSPHSAA basketball, any NYSPHSAA rules that we might have, and the NYSPHSAA scrimmage rules. So every sport, whether it's ice hockey, football, soccer, baseball, basketball, they all look exactly the same, and you can find them in our handbook. I am the liaison for the modified committee. For 2 years, the modified committee really looked at all of our rules and regulations. There was a concern that many of our rules and regulations at the modified level were very restrictive, that the landscape of youth sports had changed over the last decade, and that many students may have been turned off by looking to participate in our modified program. So there was many changes made to our modified program to remove those restrictive natures. I think in the future, you'll see any recommendations that come from the modified committee. They will deal with minimizing risk to student athletes. They will deal with maximizing participation and deal with the development of student athletes in that particular sport. And those are the 3 areas that the modified committee will look at. One of the areas that I highlight every year, and I think more and more leagues are taking advantage of, in order to try to maximize participation, but also maybe stay within the time frame of the particular sport. You can see here that we have in our handbook that has been approved an extended playing time. So in the sport of basketball, some leagues may choose to play just regulation games, which are 7-minute quarters. Those would be 4 quarters. Some leagues may choose to play a 5th period. That means every quarter is 7 minutes. But if you wanted to play a 4-quarter extended time, you could play 9-minute quarters with quarter one or number 1 being 8 minutes. There is a requirement though that both teams must have a minimum of 7 players in order to use this extended playing time. You can see field hockey, football, boys lacrosse, girls lacrosse, soccer, and volleyball all have this option of extended playing time. Modified practice sessions, the one thing that we like to highlight on this slide is that unlike the varsity level, there is a minimum number or minimum length that a practice must be held. That is 45 minutes at the modified section, and there's a maximum of 2 hours in length for a modified practice. The promotion rule, any 7th or 8th grader cannot be promoted to the varsity level in that particular sport once 50% of that schedule, of the modified schedule, has been completed. A 9th grader may be promoted at any time during the season. On another note on the promotion rule, letter E here on the slide, is that the NYSPHSAA Executive Director, Robert Zayas, he could grant a waiver of the promotion rule if a high school team is dropped by the school district at any point during the season. So many times schools, particularly in the fall sports, will start off with a JV team, and then they will find out that they don't have the numbers to support that JV team. They may try to get in a couple games if they can and see if they can continue with that program. If the school district decides to drop that program because of lack of numbers, those 7th, 8th, or 9th graders that may have been on that team, Dr. Zayas could approve a waiver to allow those students to go back to the modified level. Because normally any student that participates at the high school level for a practice, past the tryout period, or in any contest, they are no longer eligible to participate at the modified level. Transfer rule, the highlight on this is that you want to make sure that 7th and 8th graders understand that if they do compete at the high school level and then transfer to another school without a corresponding change of address, they will be subject to the transfer rule and be ineligible for that particular sport. If they did not play at the high school level for a particular sport, they still would be eligible to compete at the new school. You're only ineligible for the sports that you competed at the high school level in that particular sport. Tryout period, this is very important that you understand that most of our tryout periods for most of our sports are 3 out of the first 5 days. Once a student practices on that 4th day during that tryout period, they have now been promoted and they are no longer eligible to go back to the modified level. For the sports of wrestling, boys lacrosse, ice hockey, it's 5 out of 7. And for the sport of football, it's 8 out of 10. So please make sure that your coaches understand what the tryout period is and what the consequences may be and when those decisions have to be made if the student is going to stay up at the high school level or be moved back to the modified level. The start dates, you just want to make sure that the modified start dates do coincide with the high school dates as far as NYSPHSAA is concerned. So in the fall, winter, and spring, the modified start dates do begin when the high school level begins. Sections can be more restrictive if they want the modified to start later after the high school. They do have the right to do that. In sections that may have 4 seasons for their modified programs, they can begin earlier in that winter season, earlier than what the high school season start date is. Quickly, some other programs that we want to highlight, very important, the NYSPHSAA Scholar-Athlete program. This is an excellent program to show our students that they're being successful in the classroom and not as well as the field or the court. There are some strict deadlines that you need to follow. Please note that the fall, even for this year, the deadline is Monday, week number 23, which is December 7th. The winter will be Monday, week number 37, March 15th. For the spring and any sections that are doing fall sports season 2 will be Tuesday, week number 47, May 24th. If something happens in the future due to COVID and we have to go with a condensed model, then these dates may be revised. Along with the Scholar-Athlete program we started a few years ago, we have a School of Distinction, which I think is one of the highest honors that our association can give to our member schools. That is when 100% of your varsity athletic teams do qualify for the Scholar-Athlete program. Our membership a few years ago came to us and asked us, we were missing it by 1 or 2 teams. We think that's still a very good accomplishment. So we did establish the School of Excellence program as well, and that is where 75% of your varsity athletic programs meet the Scholar-Athlete criteria. They can be recognized as a School of Excellence. There is a deadline, and it is an application. It is not automatic that you will get these awards. You do have to apply. The deadline for that, both awards, is June 30th of every school year. The Community Service Challenge, we have partnered with Team Up for Community. This has been a huge success. Many of our athletic programs, many of our teams, many of our student athletes have done outstanding work in giving back to their community. Robert Zayas is always famous for saying, we don't prepare our students for the next level of participation. We prepare our students for the next level of life. And part of that is giving back to your community, donating your time for great causes. So we are very proud to recognize these teams. Kristen Jaden has done a great job in expanding this program. We used to recognize just one team or student athlete or school district throughout the whole year. We said we wanted to expand that into the fall, winter, and spring. And then we also want to, even though we only select one in each one of those seasons, we want to recognize all the teams that are doing great work. So you can go to our website, you can go under, find the Community Service Challenge. There is deadlines for this. The fall is week number 19, which is November 19th. The winter is week 36, which is March 8th, and the spring deadline is week number 49, which is June 7th. So please, if you have anyone in your athletic program doing good things, giving back to the community, please ask them to be recognized, and then we will recognize one particular group in the fall, winter, and spring. And those are selected by our Student Athlete Advisory Committee. Another program that Kristen Jaden is in charge of and works directly with Chris Watson is the Captains Club. We are very excited this year. We have partnered with Amari Pearson. These Captains Club are sponsored and presented by NYSCOPBA. We are working with Amari Pearson to have some Captains Clubs released. You can see one has already been released this week on Tuesday, September 29th. We have another one coming out on October 13th, October 22nd, November 9th, November 23rd, December 6th. These are found on our website under student programs. They can be viewed at the leisure of any student athletes. They can be used for their teams, and they can be used within your athletic department. So we're very excited to be presenting to you these Captains Club featuring Amari Pearson. The Student Athlete Advisory Committee, I talked about that. I've had the pleasure of working with these groups. These are outstanding student athletes. We have 2 representatives from each section, 1 male and 1 female. These individuals are, one is a junior, one is a senior. Each year there's a rollover and a turnover, obviously, when the seniors are graduating. If you do have student athletes that you think would be outstanding leaders for our association, the application is distributed in April. I can say to you that once again, Kristen Jaden is doing a great job with this, our assistant director. And for years, it's been a concern of many, and Dr. Zayas also had shared that concern that we didn't really hear directly from our student athletes. We heard from adults to say, well, this is what our students would like, but now we actually have a voice from our student athletes. We invite them to our executive committees. We invite them to our central committees. Kristen has annual regular meetings with them, and they get to provide inputs from the students' perspective. So if you have any students that you think would be great leaders and part of our program, please look for that application in April. Hazing prevention, once again, we would like our schools to be proactive and not reactive. We partnered with hazingprevent.zone and hazingprevention.org. We have 2 courses. One is a free course that athletic teams can use, athletic departments can use. Hazing prevention is everyone's responsibility. You can see the website on there. It does come with a facilitator's guide. It comes with a lot of resources. And then there's also a student course. There is a cost to the student course. Any of our member schools will receive a 25% discount on the individual course, and you can see the website on there as well. Governor's Safety Traffic, we've been partnered with them. I think this is our 3rd year now. This is an outstanding program. Many of our member schools have taken advantage of it, especially in the springtime when it comes to proms and graduations. The Governor's Safety Traffic Committee will come to your school. They will provide a speaker. They have activities that students can do, which instead of just listening to a speaker, I think students really enjoy being able to be active and do things. There's posters and other resources available. So I encourage you to contact Sergeant Todd Enware from the New York State Governor's Traffic Safety Committee. There's his information. If you can't get a hold of him, you can also contact Chris Joyce in our office. Hall of Fame nominations. I enjoy attending these Hall of Fame ceremonies each and every year. I will tell you that we've had some outstanding people that have gone in there. The majority of the people are administrators. And one of our focuses, and I know Joe Altieri, one of our assistant directors, one of his focuses is really to try to increase the number of athletes. New York State has had many outstanding athletes that have outstanding accomplishments, and we really would like to get those individuals nominated and honored into our Hall of Fame. There is a due date for nominations, that is January 29th. There is an application form. You can see the link that is on here, but if you have any athletes from your schools that have done outstanding things in the high school setting and then gone on maybe to the college and even to the professional ranks, we would like those individuals to be recognized. State championships, dates and info. This once again, Dr. Zayas brought this to New York. The 7-year calendar. We know exactly when the start dates of every championship or every season is going to be for the next 30 years. We know what every championship dates and sites are going to be for the next 7 years. You can find that under our website under resources and championships. The other thing that we've worked very hard on, Chris Joyce and Joe Altieri worked this summer, was to update our championship bid process. There is a new form. It is much more detailed. It is much more user friendly. So we are looking for as many events or as many sites as we can for our championships. That just benefits everybody. It's going to benefit the student athletes. It's going to benefit the schools, and it is also going to benefit the associations. So the more proposed bids we can receive, the better. So if you have a site in your area or in your school, we love working with high school sites. Please feel free to put in a bid. The participation survey, Kristen Jaden is in charge of this. This is mandatory. It is very, very, very important information for our association, for our member schools, and for the National Federation. So it is distributed in late March, early April. It is due by the end of May. If you don't want Kristen to keep hounding you, please get it in as soon as you can. If you have a secretary, please have your secretary do it, or please take the 10 or 15 minutes that it takes to complete this survey. But it is extremely important information that many of our sport committees use and our association uses. Rule books, obviously we've been selling rule books through our association office. Jill Gregorius does a great job in working with our rule book orders. She works directly with the NFHS, the NCAA, and other governing bodies. One thing that we would like to highlight is this year we're now offering through the NFHS only, that's the only governing body that's doing it, digital rule books. So instead of, if you're an athletic director or you're a coach and you'd like to have it on your smartphone, instead of carrying a book around, I can tell you that I have every one of the NFHS rule books on my smartphone. If I'm out of the office and I get a call about a rule and I don't have to worry about having a hard copy that is in my office, I can look it up on my phone. We can offer now digital books. The cost of those books is $6 to get the digital license for that, but I think it's a great option for not only coaches, but athletic directors and officials as well. The deadline for fall book orders, including football, even though football is going to fall season 2 and isn't starting till March 1st, is October 15th. So if you need football rule books, don't wait until February to order them because it'll be too late. You need to order your books by October 15th. I'm going to turn it back over to Robert Zayas, who is now going to talk about the last 2 slides.
Thank you, Todd. So all athletic directors must verify their attendance and that they've reviewed this webinar. And that's part of our handbook. It is a regulation of the State High School Athletic Association that all athletic directors are required to attend a mandatory eligibility workshop each year. When verifying your attendance, you will also verify your code of conduct for your school. So to verify your attendance of this webinar, simply go to the NYSPHSAA website, click on ADs and coaches. It's going to be at the top of the screen. You'll click on professional development, and then you'll click on the verification of attendance and code of conduct link. I believe the next slide, Todd, if you want to advance.
For some reason, it's not advancing. Could you talk about the last slide?
Well, basically, you're just gonna, I believe it gives you instructions on where to find that on the NYSPHSAA website. But as I just reviewed, the verification instructions are simply go to the NYSPHSAA website, click on ADs and coaches, professional development, and then you'll be able to complete it at that point in time. It is also important that you complete the verification of attendance no later than November 27th. If at any point in time you have any questions, any concerns pertaining to the New York State Public High School Athletic Association rules and regulations, or any issues related to the rapidly developing and rapidly changing COVID crisis, please reach out to us and let us know how we can go about helping you and addressing any concerns that you may have. With that being said, we will go ahead and finish this Athletic Director Eligibility Workshop by sharing our contact information with you. This does include my cell phone number as well as Todd Nelson's cell phone number. So if you need to get a hold of us at any point in time, always feel free to reach out. I want to thank you for your attendance today. And again, I hope you and your family stay safe during this very difficult time. Thank you very much.